Saul, to whom I can show God's kindness. Ziba answered the king, there is a son of Jonathan. He is crippled in both feet. Where is he? The king asked. Ziba answered, he is at the house of Machir, son of Amiel, in Lodebar. So King David had him brought from Lodebar, from the house of Machir, son of Amiel. When Mephibosheth, son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, came to David, he bowed down to pay him honor. David said, Mephibosheth, your servant, he replied. Verse 7 says, don't be afraid, David said to him, for I will surely show you kindness for the sake of your father Jonathan. I will restore to you all of the land that will belong to your grandfather Saul, and you will always eat at my table. Verse 13 says, and Mephibosheth lived in Jerusalem because he always ate at the king's table, and he was crippled in both feet. May God add a blessing to the reading. You may be seated. This morning I'll be coming from the subject, it's a process. Can y'all help me say that? Say, it's a process. Last time I stood before you all, it was during the midweek service, and I talked from the subject of what room does fear have. And that night we talked about how much time and space and energy we give to fear instead of filling that same amount of time with praying to God, without seeking him, without having hope, and without having faith. So preparing for today, I looked back at those notes, and I felt that God was kind of keeping me in that same little area. So on Tuesday, I was up kind of late studying, like 1 o'clock, and I began to just read over the introduction, what I thought God wanted me to say originally, and all of a sudden, I just remember hitting the backspace button, and I was like, okay, God, what now? What do you want me to do? And then he told me, stop trying to be all deep and just tell the people that this is a message that there is still hope, that there is still hope in the midst of the situations that you are in, and that there is hope in the future, that there is still hope in the midst of the situation you may be in. There is still hope that the tears and the pain you are feeling are only going to last for a season, that they are only temporary. I was like, okay, God, I begin to think about my life and those that are around me, and how so many times we as young people are hurt and we are wounded and we don't know how to recover. I feel as if we feel that our lives are going in one direction, and all of a sudden it's like it comes to a complete stop, a complete turnaround. We get down and we stay in that dark place for too long. When we begin to think about those experiences, we allow those experiences sometimes to hinder us from moving forward. We have to admit that sometimes we don't know how to use those times as building blocks. We let those times hinder us because we are afraid of it happening all over again. We deal with trust issues because of the people we trusted have let us down. But I've come to encourage someone today that even though you may be wounded, even though you may be angry, and even though you may come out with a few scratches, there is still hope and there is more to your story. Because we let those bad experiences hinder us, it leaves us contemplating and worrying about what is next. We spend so much time on how we can't do something versus pushing ourselves to keep trying. So I began to wonder why we do this as a people, and many reasons popped in my head. Two reasons that popped out to me the most was the reasons of being afraid of failure and or getting the same outcome as in the past. I began to realize that many times we find ourselves questioning our abilities and wondering what an outcome will be instead of stepping out and doing it. By not stepping out and by staying stagnant for too long leaves us often finding ourselves with a bunch of what ifs. We find ourselves saying, what if this and what if that? What if I would have stepped out and accepted that job? What if I would have finished school? Or what if I would have studied for that test? We are filled with a bunch of what ifs, and those what ifs go beyond just those times we did not do something. However, they come on many times because of past experiences, wounds, roadblocks, and questioning where would we be if those things hadn't happened. What if I would not have had that baby? What if I did not have this illness? What if my business would not have failed? What if I wouldn't have put my trust in that person? I'm sure by now, and I hope by now, that you are thinking about your own what ifs, and you're thinking about the time that you give to those what ifs. Think about how all of those times, the times of disappointment, those times of difficulty, those times of pain and hurt to take over, we allow those times to take over us and hinder us from focusing on the what's next. We have to admit that we all have those moments when we all wonder where we would be in life if things would have went the way we had planned them out. Today we're going to look at a story of a man who did not let his sudden life experience, his downfall, his disability to stop him from living life. We're going to look at a man today who had every reason, I believe, to just stop living. Someone who could have let his current place, his current position to hinder his what's next. This afternoon, I introduce you to a man by the name of Mephibosheth. He was the grandson of King Saul and the son of Jonathan. You see, if everything had worked out the way it was supposed to be, Mephibosheth was in line to one day become the king. If everything would have happened the way it was supposed to be, from birth, Mephibosheth was being trained to become king. However, due to what happened to him in 2 Samuel chapter 4, that plan was now a lost plan. However, this afternoon we can look at Mephibosheth's life as an example. Yes, we can look to him as an example when we can look to him as an example when we are hit head on with a problem. Today, everyone in this place, young and old, can look to him as an example for when we are living and doing things the right way, and all of a sudden, everything is put on pause. We will look at how every ounce of control he may have had over his current place or his future was now gone. Are y'all with me? All right. To get a better look at our scripture for today, we'll go back a few chapters and look at how we get to our verse for today. So in chapter 1 of 2 Samuel, we find King Saul, Mephibosheth's grandfather. During this time, there were many battles going on back to back, and one day King Saul and Jonathan, Mephibosheth's father, were killed in battle. Back then, word traveled just a little bit slower. They didn't have text messages. They didn't have email. So it took them 3 chapters, all the way at 2 Samuel chapter 4, for word to get back to the camp. 2 Samuel chapter 4, verse 1, it says, word has just gotten back to the home camp, and the king and Jonathan were killed. So it says the people lost courage, and all of Israel became alarmed. In 2 Samuel chapter 4 and 4, it says, Jonathan, son of Saul, had a son who was lame in both feet. He was 5 years old when the news about Saul and Jonathan came from Jezreel. His nurse picked him up and fled, but as she hurried to leave, he fell and became disabled. His name was Mephibosheth. The battle that took place in the remaining parts of chapter 4 got real, battles after battle over territory. So in chapter 5, King Saul is now dead, and David has just become the king over Israel. Over the next few chapters, David and his men began to have victory after victory. Things began to settle down and became a little bit normal around the kingdom. In 2 Samuel chapter 5 and 15, it says, David reigned over all Israel, doing what was just and right for his people. Now we're going back to our scripture for today, 2 Samuel chapter 9, where we find King David sitting on his throne asking, is there anyone still left in the house of Saul to whom I can show kindness for Jonathan's sake? Now I wonder if you are thinking about why David is asking to show kindness for Jonathan's sake out of the blue, especially after what happened in the family, especially how they were on opposite teams back in the day. Well, you see, David used to be a servant of King Saul, and David always put in 150% no matter what he did, and King Saul did not like that at all. He was jealous of David. He was very intimidated by David. So one day, King Saul wanted David to be killed, but Jonathan, the son of King Saul, the father of Mephibosheth, knew better, and he made it his job to keep David safe. So that's why now we find Jonathan trying to pay back his kindness. When we look at David, David is now the king. He is now promoted, and he didn't do what some people would have done, and he didn't do what some people would do, and he remembered who had his back from the beginning. He didn't forget about who had his back and who protected him in the past. So now it was his time to fulfill his promise and show his kindness despite the past towards those descendants of Saul and Jonathan. At this time, David is speaking to one of Saul's remaining servants, Ziba. In verse 3, as we read, the king asks, is there no one still alive from the house of Saul to whom I can show God's kindness? Ziba reluctantly answered the king, there is still a son of Jonathan. He is lame in both feet. Where is he? The king asked. Ziba answered, he is at the house of Machir, son of Amiel, in Lodebar. You may be wondering why Ziba was so reluctant answering King David. He didn't want David's clean image to be tarnished because he was associated with someone from Lodebar. Now we get to dig just a little bit deeper into our main parts of our message for this morning. We get to observe and look at our example, which is Mephibosheth. Mephibosheth is currently living in a city called Lodebar. Mephibosheth went from being trained to become king to living in a place of despair in a matter of seconds. Life experiences will do that to us, right? Life experiences will make everything change in a matter of a second. Lodebar was on the other side of town. Lodebar was located on the opposite side of Jerusalem. Lodebar was not your normal place, and it wasn't your ideal place to live. Lodebar was like the neighborhood that you drove through and you made sure your doors were locked and your windows were all the way rolled up. Lodebar was a place where those people who had no place where the regular people were sent to live. Lodebar was filled with people with problems, with illnesses, and they were living in poverty. Mephibosheth has been placed in Lodebar because his handicap, his illness of being lame in both feet. Living with an illness back then was considered a curse. There was no other place to live but in Lodebar. Let us take a few moments and look at Lodebar. If you really think about it, Lodebar was more than just a physical place. It is more than that. It's a place of discomfort, a place mental and spiritual. Lodebar may be for someone even in addiction. Many of us today are living in a Lodebar place. Many of us are going through so many trials and tribulations and are in the darkest spaces in our lives. We can say we are living as Mephibosheth in Lodebar. But as I told you, we can look to Mephibosheth as an example. He never once allowed his Lodebar, his handicap, to take over his life. Yes, he had been living with no sign of growth. However, there was no sign that Mephibosheth was being down about his life. Mephibosheth may not have known, but residing in Lodebar was only temporary. Just as Mephibosheth's stay in Lodebar was temporary, your stay in your Lodebar is just temporary. I know I can speak for some in my generation, and Minister LaFleur talked about this morning, that we expect some things to just happen instantly. We don't like to wait. But in some cases, I find that it's okay to be like that sometimes. Nevertheless, in some life situations, we have to understand that God will bring us through a process. Can y'all speak back to me and say, life is a process? We have to know it's a process, and God will bring us through that process, those transitioning times. Even when those times don't feel good, we feel it isn't right. Just because we can't see the end doesn't mean we should quit early. Just because you are wounded doesn't mean your life is over. Again, say it's a process. As I said, we will use Mephibosheth as our example this afternoon. Even though it's a very short story and with very little detail, if we pull it apart, we can use his life as an example on how to get through the process of life, or the process of going through a Lodebar. We as people, although we do not want to admit it, we have to accept that God will bring us to a point where we have to live in a Lodebar for a season. This brings us to our first point for this afternoon, which is to accept it. We can relate to Mephibosheth. Yes, you ask why we can relate to him. That's because, like him, some of us are living in Lodebar, and it may not be our fault. But as Mephibosheth, we have to come to grips with it. We have to accept it, and we have to own it. Like him, some of us were dropped, we were hurt, we were injured by someone who cared for us, whom we put our complete trust in. And I'm sure many can relate and think of a time because of someone else, we have been put in some messed up situations. We've been abused, we've been hurt, we've been put in some bad financial situations because of someone else. We have to learn how to accept and to deal with those situations that we are in. We have to deal with it, and we have to acknowledge it. Yes, I am in this current place, but if I continue to push through it, it won't be for too long. Figuratively, it may only be for a night. Even though we are in Lodebar, and it may be it's because of something we did, or maybe because of what someone else did, Lodebar is a place we all dread and we cannot stay in. You may be wondering, what is the key part of accepting it, and why we must accept being in Lodebar? Well, with acceptance comes trust that we will be okay at the end of the day. we can look at the word trust just a little bit differently today. And normally we would just say we have to put our trust in God, and that is what we must do in these situations. But we could go a little bit further, and not only can we say we have to put our trust in God, but we have to make it to where God can trust us. In order for him to bring us out of our Lodebar space, he has to be able to trust us. Trust that we will not become bitter. Trust that we will continue to do the right things, and trust that we will continue to trust him. Trust him as Mephibosheth did. Mephibosheth not once stopped living. I believe he had every reason to just stop living and live with a what if I wouldn't have been dropped mentality. In verse 5, it says, so King David had him brought from Lodebar, from the house of Machir, son of Amiel. In verse 6, it says, when Mephibosheth, son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, came to David, he bowed down to pay him honor. David said, Mephibosheth, at your service, he replied. With every test in life, we always have to remember there is a blessing at the end. You may be going through right now, you may be at the lowest point in your life, but remember, God is working on your behalf behind the scenes. Sometimes we can be so in a rush to fix what God wants broken that we just have to accept and know God is working on our behalf. He had to accept it, and now Mephibosheth was being forced to face it, and that's our second point. We have to face it head on. Mephibosheth was being called to meet the king. Mephibosheth, the lame one, didn't know the king personally, but he did know one thing, and that was that the position of king was supposed to be his. He was now about to meet the man who sat in the position that was supposed to be his from the beginning. Now think about it. Think about many times in life we are forced to look at people sitting in positions or see people doing well, and we know that we should be in that position. However, we have to think about it this way. Think of it this way. If it was God's intentions for us to be sitting there, sitting where someone else would be sitting, we would be sitting and not looking at them. Two, we have to look at it as if God is working on something even better. He was about to face it, and he had to deal with it. By facing this head on, he now had two choices. He had the choice whether to be angry and bitter towards King David, or he could deal with the fact that what happened must have been what God intended for his life. Mephibosheth chose to come with no bitterness and bow to pay honor to David. We have to stop there and look at something. We have to look at how in verse 5, Mephibosheth was sent for. In addition, in verse 6, Mephibosheth was humbling himself before the king. That simply says Mephibosheth got up and went immediately to David. No questions about it. Mephibosheth, wounded and lame, got up and went immediately. He did that, and some of us don't get up when God tells us to just go left instead of right. Mephibosheth got up and went immediately. Once again, Mephibosheth did not let his Lodebar situation stop him. He didn't let the what-ifs stop him. He did not let his wounds stop him. And I can only imagine Mephibosheth sitting there. Then he sees Ziba with word from the king. The king wants to see. Mephibosheth had never thought he would get out of the city of Lodebar. He had been around too many people with the mindset of, I'm stuck here. However, when this opportunity opened up for him, he knew that no matter what it took, it was time for him to go. Mephibosheth, lame in both feet, wounded, but he was on the way to see the king because the king had called for him. He didn't know where he was going, but he was determined to go. Mephibosheth knew that he had to do whatever it took to get out of it. We must accept we are in Lodebar, face it head on, and then make it our goal to get out. The final key to getting through the process of Lodebar, the process of life, or the key to making it out of Lodebar, that dark place, is to be determined to get out of it. Let's do a quick recap if that's okay with y'all. We have King David who has sent for anyone who is left of the house of Saul. Mephibosheth is the only one and is brought to the king. Mephibosheth dropped by his nurse. He was being kept protected, but dropped while they were trying to flee for protection. Mephibosheth was living in the city of Lodebar, the place where no one wanted to be, the place that people were sent to just give up and dream about what could have been. We are now to the place where we find Mephibosheth face to face with the person who is sitting where he is supposed to be. We find Mephibosheth now about to get out of Lodebar. So it's at verse 7, that's where we at. He says, he is still clueless to why the king wants to see him. I can only imagine that he's probably expecting the king to torture him because of the way his grandfather treated him. He probably thinks he is going to be made a servant of the king, and I cannot help but think that he is thinking that he will just be sent back to Lodebar because he is lame in both feet. He even considers himself useless. He considers himself a useless dog in verse 8. He finds himself useless because he has been living in Lodebar for too long. Even though he kept pushing and kept living, Mephibosheth couldn't see a way out. Once you have been placed or put into a Lodebar by someone and you hang around those people, you get the mindset that you will not get out. I can only imagine that the reason Mephibosheth was confused on why the king wanted him was because he had gotten comfortable in his Lodebar. He probably was like, God, what now? So he makes it to the king, and the king tells him, don't be afraid, for surely I will show your kindness for the sake of your father Jonathan. I will restore to you all of the land that belonged to your grandfather Saul, and you will always eat at my table. In verse 9 it says, Then the king summoned Ziba, Saul's steward, and said to him, I have given your master's grandson everything that belonged to you, Saul, and his family. Because Mephibosheth trusted God, and God trusted him, and because he never gave up on life, he was now on his way up to be blessed as God intended for him. He was on the way to be blessed by God through someone he had never met before. He was on the way up to be blessed by God in a place he had never been before. The life of Mephibosheth is showing us how God will bless us in the most unlikely times, in the most unlikely places. This is showing us that God will bring us out of those at the most unlikely times and places, and bring us to a place we have never been or even imagined. In verse 11 it says, Then Ziba said to the king, Your servant will do whatever my lord the king commands his servant to do. So Mephibosheth ate at David's table like one of the king's sons. In verse 12 it says, Mephibosheth had a young son named Micah, and all of the members of Ziba's household were servants of Mephibosheth. And Mephibosheth lived in Jerusalem because he always ate at the king's table. He was lame in both feet. So we have to take notice that it says in verse 12, Mephibosheth had a son. Lame, but he still produced a son. Right then, God was showing Mephibosheth that he was uniquely made and he had better plans for his life. Mephibosheth was lame, but now sitting at the king's table with servants providing his every desire and his every need. We can all think of a time when God simply flipped it just like that. We expect God to bless us one way when God is like, no, I will bless you this way, and it will be much better than you expected. Remember, the Bible tells us his ways are higher than our ways and thoughts. That is the message to you this morning, that God will bless you unexpectedly, when you least expect it, and even when things are not looking its best. Yes, you are hurting, and yes, you are angry. Yes, you are even ready to give up because you are living in that Lodebar, both physically and mentally, but just know you are in this position in life and living this test because God is setting you up and getting you ready for a blessing. God is about to elevate you, and you won't be able to even comprehend it. God is helping you write your story, and your story will be used to change the world. Think about it. If Mephibosheth would have became king, today we wouldn't have this story or lesson to even look at. We would not have this lesson to look at today, but Mephibosheth's story would not have been written and could not be used to show God's promises. I heard a great quote while I was studying and researching for today, and it said, remember, somebody went through the same mess you're going through right now, and they did not make it, but you will be the one that will. Your story is unique, and that's what we have to remember. Our stories are unique. Have you ever thought about it? If everything went as planned, where would your life be if there were no difficulties? How strong, or better yet, how weak would we be if there were no tests? For those difficulties are only building our characters. The day will come when we are like Mephibosheth, and today should be the day that you will get so desperate that you will do whatever it takes to just get out. We will be so determined, and we will make our mind up to get out, that we will crawl and that we will even limp our way out of our Lodebar. Someone here today has been in Lodebar for too long, and it's time for you to declare over your life that it's time I get out of here. No what ifs about it. So as I take my seat, I remind you of the steps to get through the process called life, through the process of Lodebar. And that's one, to accept when you are in your time of Lodebar. Trust God, and that will show him that he can trust you with greater. Two, face it head on and know that God is working on your behalf. Learn how to bless God, and that will show him that he can bless you. And three, simply be determined to just get out, whether that is by crawling, by limping, whether that means coming out with scars and wounds. Whatever it takes, get out today. Use what you have to just get out. I have come to encourage you today that you are on your way up like Mephibosheth. You may not see it and you may not feel it, but you are on your way to sit at the king's table, and you are on your way to get all that God has promised you. I'm grateful for this.